Thanks for tuning in to That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions. Brought to you by Freedman International, the international campaign experts taking the pain out of your multi-market campaigns. I'm your host, Conor Byrne, and having worked with Freedman International in my previous role as a global marketing leader, I've experienced firsthand their deep level of expertise and attention to detail as the go-to experts for all international campaign needs. Now, let's get right into today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions. Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the Cannes Sessions, brought to you by Freedman International. Of course, this is the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Don't forget, if you can, I would love if you could rate or review this episode or any of the other episodes that you've enjoyed, wherever you are listening or watching. It really helps us reach and build on this amazing community of engaged marketers just like you. So massive help if you can do that for us. Of course, if you're interested in getting involved, That's What I Call Marketing, our sponsorship kit is available on our website, that'swhatIcallmarketing.com/sponsor. So on to today's episode. Well, John Lombardo and Pete Weinberg built a reputation as the gurus of B2B marketing, being named as the Les and Peter of B2B marketing by Les and Peter. And they took time out of their yacht hopping in Cannes to join me to talk about what they are up to since leaving the B2B Institute. Now, before we get into the details of the episode, in a highly controversial moment, John and Peter take time to clarify and rectify a comment they made, highly controversial comment, on the Uncensored CMO podcast recently. Now, we then managed to get over all the problems that caused and get into the conversation we had at Cannes. Of course, we talk about their journey at LinkedIn and why they decided to leave. We dive into the core principles that guided their work at the B2B Institute, including the influence of Weinberg, Les and Peter on marketing effectiveness. They reflect on the impact they had at LinkedIn, helping elevate B2B marketing. And I think I reflect on how they elevated B2B marketing and how they perceive the opportunities in B2B sector growth compared to B2C. They explain the challenges they faced when scaling traditional market research in the B2B sector, high cost, slow pace, and this led them to explore and adopt synthetic research as a scalable solution that leverages AI to mimic customer responses accurately and cost effectively. It is fascinating. I will be honest, I was utterly confused by it until they explained it brilliantly. So stay tuned to listen to their wonderful explanation of it. So we discussed their new company, Evidenza, and how this aims to build finance-friendly marketing plans using synthetic research. The method is going to allow marketers to generate reliable insights quickly and more affordably, democratizing access to robust market research. So fascinating episode. Their vision for Evidenza is phenomenal and really, really great to hear about it. And the things they get to run with Evidenza. You'll hear about that in this episode. So enjoy John and Pete from Evidenza. John, Pete, thanks for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. John, returning guest. Pete, you're
first time caller.
I'm so sad. You had John first? I mean, what's going on here?
I couldn't get your email address.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. You had to settle for the B team. You know, it happens. It happens.
First time caller, long time listener.
Well, so I need to play you something. Hopefully this will come out and I want to get your reaction to this. So hang on 1 second. Hopefully this works.
This is us on the John Evans podcast.
John, our absolute favorite podcast.
Thank you. It's the only podcast I listen to.
I'm hoping you got picked up by the mic. But when you were on that other podcast with that other guy,
yeah, we don't know that
you
guy.
said something like the only podcast I listen to. John, do you want to react to it being the only podcast you listen to?
That's what I call marketing is the only podcast I listen to.
Are you familiar with the concept of pandering? That's what you
Is that what's happening now?
Yeah, actually,
Call me a panderbird. Use a character.
This is the only podcast I listen to. And frankly, I think what John said was in very poor taste, and I disavow it. It does not reflect our values at the Evidenza Corporation whatsoever.
No. We love all podcasts equally. We love all podcasts equally and all creative equally too. You're a panderbird. Don't be a panderbird.
Wow. Okay.
Look, the big news, obviously, in the last couple of months was you two leaving the B2B Institute at LinkedIn. Probably not a shock for you, but I think it was a bit of a shock for a lot.
For us, actually. But yes.
Shock for our wives.
Yeah, it was certainly a shock
Well,
for
yeah.
our wives.
Tell me, Pete, a bit about kind of the journey to, kind of that decision to move on from LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, we can get into various levels of detail, but I think
I want all the
to
gritty,
make the
grimy
long
detail.
story short, I'll give you the short version is, what we were really doing at the B2B Institute was helping these big B2B brands adopt, I would call it Ehrenberg Bass style marketing or Bennett and Field style marketing. So we were trying to bring this marketing effectiveness revolution to B2B. And it was a wonderful job. We absolutely loved it. The problem is just that what we were doing didn't scale very well because there was a really key input to all of it, which was market research. So like, for example, if you want to orient all your marketing around category entry points, which is a key Ehrenberg Bass idea, you've got to run a survey. You've got to get thousands of B2B buyers to fill in a survey, tell you which brands are mentally available in which situations. And traditional research, it just does not scale well. It is extremely expensive, especially in B2B. Like, try to get a bunch of CFOs to take a survey. It's practically, you almost even can't pay for it because it's impossible to get those people to take surveys. And then it's painfully slow. Clients need to build their strategy by next week. They get hauled in front of the board on short notice. They don't have 6 months, 12 months to wait for a survey to come back. So we were just struggling. We were struggling to get more clients to adopt Ehrenberg Bass marketing because we couldn't do enough market research. And then we got into the space we're in now, synthetic research, which we believe is the scalable solution.
We'll get into that, but your time at the B2B Institute was really impactful. You were kind of you self-professed is wrong, but you were called the Les and Peter of B2B.
By Les Bennett, once again, not self-proclaimed.
I want to make that clear.
I just want to add John to that.
But you were having a huge impact. A lot of the things that you were talking about, people were buying. And I think it'd be fair to say, at the time that you were there, B2B started getting kind of, kudos. Yeah. People started seeing it as actually a viable career option, which it wasn't seen as like the boring side of marketing. It's not to say the marketing got better, because it's still mind-numbingly boring, a lot of it. But people were starting to see actually B2B can be great. Did you feel that progress when you were there?
Well, we talked a little bit about this on that other podcast with the yellow colors,
Just kidding.
not the red colors. But I think there's a very interesting overall shift in the world, just generally, and it is that B2B is so much bigger than B2C.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally, we'll talk a little bit about this in this podcast, but if you just reason off of the financials, off of the economics, I looked up Diageo's market cap a couple of days ago. I actually thought it was $300 billion. It's about $73 billion. Love Guinness, by the way. Would love to have a Guinness with the Guinness people at Guinness.
Lovely.
Yeah, just saying if you're listening. But a $75 billion company is an enormous company.
Yeah.
But Microsoft is a purely B2B company for the most part, and it's, $3.3 trillion.
Yeah.
And all these big cloud companies that you've never heard of are going to go public, and they're going to be bigger than Diageo. And there's many, many more of those to come. So there's an enormous opportunities generally in B2B, and we did get some feedback on this, so I will slightly tailor this point. For the most part, the work that is being done in B2B is just not as mature. It does not follow the Ehrenberg Bass playbook. Ergo, there's just an enormous opportunity where the work isn't as mature and the opportunity is 10, 20, 100 times bigger,
Yeah.
But I like to think progress was made. I have a very simple benchmark I use, which is I used to speak at the same conference. I actually just did it again. I speak at the same conference every year, which is the ANA B2B conference.
Okay, yeah.
And it's all the top CMOs of B2B companies. And I probably did it for 5 years running. And every year I would put up How Brands Grow, Jenny Romaniak's book, and I would just say, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And, the first year, 0 hands. Second year, 10 hands.
John.
Yeah, it was John. He was in the
talking
audience.
about it every year. People were seeing Peter every year, and he's like, "You've heard of it."
My point is, it's not a fast-moving revolution like AI, which is scaling exponentially.
Yeah.
It's a slow-motion revolution. But I do find every single year, more and more B2B marketers were aware of those principles. And I think there are more good examples of B2B brand building. We wrote an article in Marketing Week about it recently. We used to say just Salesforce. Salesforce is one of the only ones doing it, but now ServiceNow is doing great work. MailChimp's doing great work. Toast does great work. Disco does great work. You can find a solid 20 examples of Ehrenberg Bass style B2B creative.
Teamwork did a brilliant thing recently. The Client, did you see that?
I didn't see
really,
it. What was it?
Really entertaining.
What was it?
Really humorous piece of work about what the client the demands of the client, and it was entertaining, and I was like, oh my god, like this is.
Who did the Rockstar thing in
Workday?
Yeah, the Rockstar thing in Workday was wonderful.
Yeah, it was great.
Because that is the most overused term in all of corporate marketing is rockstar. You're a rock star, you're a rock star. I was born in a very funny and humorous lampooning insight, right? Born from a lampooning humorous insight. Yeah, I mean, there's also like, coming back to kind of the lesson Peter thing, there's so much talk about marketing effectiveness, which obviously is enormously important, and we need more and more and more of that in the world of B2B. But there is this obviously thing that we are doing now, which brings together an efficiency revolution, which is AI, and an effectiveness revolution, which is EBI, Lesson Peter, Ritson, Jenny, Karen Nelson Field, Grace Kite, all of these people that are doing wonderful work. So I think there's this just fascinating confluence, like there is a change now. There is a change, and confluence is also convergence.
Confluence.
Confluence is the joining two rivers, generally speaking.
This is mostly me and John's conversation.
Yeah,
I
agree. Convergence is also a correct word to use there, but confluence is also. You use the obvious one. I use the more unique, distinctive one. Confluence.
This is like myself and Paul Dervin having conversations.
Right.
Like it's just like. Yeah.
But anyways, there is
yeah.
There's this interesting confluence, and it's wonderful, and it's exciting because it is a real tailwind, and you want, I think a lot of also, we didn't decide to leave LinkedIn for this very reason, but there's a famous line about Jeff Bezos where he was working at D.E. Shaw, which is one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. He probably would have made $100 million working there, maybe more. He's a quant VP, very senior guy. And he said, he kind of was looking at the data on the internet, and it was growing at 3,400% a year. And he was like, if you're going to leave D.E. Shaw and leave behind $100 million, you're going to go to an enormous financial opportunity. I do feel, yes, is there a lot of hype around AI? Of course there is. But there's hype because basically we are building this kind of next generation of technology and platforms. And if you're going to leave somewhere like LinkedIn, or you're going to leave somewhere like D.E. Shaw, I cannot believe I'm comparing myself to Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. To be clear, we were not making.
And that's not what we're saying. It's not what we're saying.
We loved this great time.
But
It was a little shy of
just a bit outside.
Missing a few zeros.
But you do want to leave for a big opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And I think AI does enormously intelligent and interesting things that, frankly, like we were talking about on the way over, one of which is segmentation. I think we can kind of go into these sorts of things. But yeah, big opportunity. Big tailwind, a lot of growth, and it's exciting.
And we will get it because I want to really understand what you're up to now, and I've had a look at some of the stuff, listened to some of the stuff, but we'll dig into it a bit more. But before we get into that, I want you travel the world with your jobs.
We did
jet setting, first class, 5-star hotel.
It was hard work, but somebody had to do it.
Who was first class and 5-star hotel?
I can't hear you over the sounds of the yachts here at Cannes, but you were saying something about jet. Yeah, no.
Surely you're not talking about us.
Not us. No.
B&B. But what were some of the things you observed from brands, as they were looking, particularly B2B brands, as they were looking to kind of scale internationally, kind of some things they were challenged with, like cultural nuances? Were any observations you had about brands that kind of struggle, I think, with that sometimes?
I think it's kind of overplayed, one thing I'm always interested in is these unresolvable conflicts, or if you keep hearing about a conflict over and over again, sometimes I think it's unresolvable. So like, for example, everybody talks about marketing and sales misalignment and how they hate each other. Every company, marketing hates sales, sales hates marketing. So I don't try to spend a lot of money, a lot of effort trying to resolve that problem because, people have been trying to resolve it for 100 years. Same thing with what is the exact ROI of advertising? Like, no one's figured that out for 100 years. In the case you gave, it's like this global, regional tension, that plays out at every company. I'm not sure it's hugely resolvable, but I will say we did a ton of research in our time at LinkedIn and currently, and the differences. This is just the thing about marketers in general. I think marketers are trained to pay very close attention to differences. So when you're looking at two different segments, technical audiences and non-technical audiences, or the UK versus the US versus Singapore, everybody wants to know what are the differences between these regions. John and I have a very different mental model, which is we're interested in similarities, because similarities, if you find a common need across a segment, across markets, then you can get economies of scale.
Yeah.
You can have one great message for one big segment, which is generally a simpler and superior strategy than a million differences for different segments. So I'd say a stat Jenny Romaniak generally told us, which I believe proved to be true, the more research we did, is that like usually the differences between a region, they're like 80% the same. Like whatever results you get in one market, you get like 80% of the same results in another market if you talk to customers there. And if you want to focus on the 20% that are different, you can. But like we're much more interested in focusing on the 80% that's the same so that you can do scaled global marketing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about it.
I mean, and also, I think something, so there is I believe, Nicole Hartnett sent this to me, I believe in Jenny's book on page 69 or so.
Oh, wow.
There's a stat that shows that category entry points, people assume category entry points, for example, will be vastly different from market to market.
Yeah.
But if we just look at the data actually indicates that they are 70% the same. So there is a difference. There's 30% that is different from market to market, which honestly I even question that, but let's say there is 30% that is different from market to market. Then it makes some sense to say, okay, there ought to be some localization. But 70% of the things are the same, which means there ought to be more globalization, let's call it, across marketing, which means there ought to be more scale, which is really the primary way to get financial value, right? So, and that kind of comes to the secondary point around category entry points, kind of to this financial need. I would say that, again, we do believe in similarities, not differences, or commonalities, not differences. I think people make this mistake, as Peter said, of focusing on what's different. But what's the same in the same need we experience in all of our conversations is people need help in B2B marketing, advocating to their finance teams or justifying to their finance teams why they need budget to invest in campaigns, to build brand awareness, mental availability, to then grow the business. It's just not well understood by finance,
right?
By sales as well. I mean, sales like almost cannot constitutionally understand it or accept it because they have to get credit for the sale. Marketing can never get credit for the sale, right? Which is something we've talked a lot about. But finance doesn't care in the same way. Sales and marketing do have this irreconcilable difference. They're fighting over the same thing. We don't fight because we're different, we fight because we're the same. Again, coming back to similarities, not differences. But finance doesn't care.
Yeah.
Finance is kind of the independent arbiter. They literally just want to reward essentially performance or value creation. And so actually they could be an enormous partner to marketing, but they need help. Marketers need help because in B2B, it's product and engineering or it's sales, they're always number one, and at best marketing is third. Marketing needs to, as Peter has said, fight finance with finance. So I think part of the thing we are going to try to do is give marketers better financial marketing plans so they can go in and make the case to finance, who can help them make the case to sales, and then as their budgets grow, as their teams grow, as their performance gets better, they'll have more status, they will have more opportunity. I mean, that's a huge opportunity in B2B marketing. It does not exist at, in the way it does it like a Diageo or a P&G or a Unilever or you name it.
Yeah, and I think probably because I agree, I think sometimes the question you ask, and I saw that in a previous job was, people will be sent something and be like, will this work in your market? That question by itself will make people look for the thing that won't work.
That's right.
Why won't it work? That's where their head goes. But there are nuances then, and that's where kind of, maybe the 30% are more tactical or more like translations or, things like that. And interestingly, Jessica Gilmartin from Calendly was telling me that I think it was in Japan, her team there was like, we should do, it was like a 2-hour long webinar or something. She was like, God, no, we should only do like 20 minutes. And they were like, no. And she goes, they were right, because that was kind of culturally accepted. And I might have the country and the stats wrong, but her point was she'd never have got there without the local insight. So they're the kind of, it's probably more at that level versus kind of strategic.
Yeah, listen, let's say there's a 20% difference or 30% difference. Sometimes there are meaningful differences worth paying attention to, but again, I think the bias should be towards how are these markets all the same? And a lot of the problems in marketing, maybe all of the problems in marketing, it always just comes down to incentives. John and I love Charlie Munger, late great Charlie Munger, the patron saint of mental models, and he just had the killer quote, which is, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Yeah. And the truth is, local market teams don't want to be told what to do by a global center of excellence. And it doesn't even really matter if the advice is good or bad. They want to be able to control what goes on in their region, which I understand. That's that gives them autonomy. It makes them happier in their jobs. Whether or not it's what commercially makes sense for the business is a different question, but that's the kind of incentive that exists, I would say.
But there are some things that should stay the same and should never change, and there are some things that can change. Like Jenny always said, I think, Jenny Romaniak, around, your branding is actually fixed. But your messaging is optional or is flexible. And so, like, you can rotate different CEPs, reliability, scalability, savings, whatever, refreshing, available everywhere. But your branding is always Coke Red, or it is always, MailChimp Yellow, or it is always, that's what I call marketing.
You don't change your branding.
Hulkamania.
Yeah,
Red.
Hulkamania, I love it.
Specific branding? Or you
No,
just
we're
brand your-
consistent.
And also, brands are things that do not change. Like, a brand that changes in every market is not a brand, and so it's about what is staying the same. But that's also, now that we're at Cannes, we can talk about this. The problem that marketing has much more broadly, or one of the problems it has, is that the emphasis on what's new and what's different and what's novel and what's changing. And again, that's great for creative, but people don't actually think that that's fine for creative. It's not fine for the branding that wraps around, that kind of dresses the creative. And so that's just a huge mistake that we make. Ritson calls it, I believe, the pornography of change, which is a very, very colorful
That's
way of
really
talking.
unlike him.
Yeah. He's so timid with his language usually, Yeah. But he's right.
I could barely get him to talk yesterday.
right.
He was just...
He's a shrinking violet.
Yeah.
He's a shrinking violet.
And you don't need to change as much in B2B either. Lots of times B2B brands will come to us and say, we're so far behind. There's actually an advantage to that in many ways, especially when you haven't changed your branding,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the finance. Well, this has always been a
Right.
funny nuance
Right.
of the finance brands are actually much better at brand management than the tech brands. And it's partially because it's so hard to change your creative in finance because you have to go through 9 billion layers of legal approval before you can say anything. That it creates a disincentive to constantly be churning out real-time marketing and new marketing. And, John and I think those are bad approaches to marketing. Finance was, the legal departments of finance spared them from a terrible trend of developing new creative every single
and going
day.
blue.
Real-time marketing and turning blue. Yeah, so it's interesting. It's an interesting nuance.
Actually, we have some wonderful data we produced with, I believe it was Distinctive Bat, Irish company.
Oh, yeah,
Shout out
Cahill.
to Distinctive Bat.
Great company. Yeah.
Great company.
And the data was wonderful because actually people think that they should follow the tech brands because the tech brands are seen as, kind of new and innovative. But in fact, because tech brands are new and innovative, they change their branding a lot. And as a result, they have almost no actual known brands.
Yeah.
You have the big ones like the Microsoft and you have the Salesforce. Those companies have been around for 40 years.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at the
Forget
data in tech, the branding is much worse on the kind of distinctive asset matrix. If you look at finance, because they don't change their brand, it's because they're just more conservative institutions at their core, their branding is much better known.
Yeah.
So, and they have older brands there as well, so that contributes to it as well. But it is, I would say from a branding perspective, don't look to tech, look to finance, which I would say is a generally contrarian take to what we are kind of thinking about or told to think about.
Yeah, definitely. So on to shiny new things. We've touched a bit on kind of the journey to get you to Evidenza. Can you explain it a bit? I've kind of listened to you talk in another place. I've watched and read stuff on the site, but anyone who hasn't done that yet, can you briefly explain Evidenza and what it is going to do?
We would be absolutely delighted to talk about our new company, Evidenza.
We thought you'd never ask.
We thought you'd never ask. We could have talked about it the whole time. I think I'll give you the
Sitting
short
here,
answer.
being polite, answering all the other questions. When's he getting to that one?
There is what we are doing, which I think is inherently interesting and useful, and then there is how we are doing it, which I think is also somewhat novel.
Hold on a second. You think what we're doing is interesting?
I'm
What?
fascinated.
Oh my God.
I find us to be completely fascinating. I don't know about you. John's maybe a little bored of us, but my enthusiasm remains very
I
high.
generally like us.
Very
We're
high.
okay.
Anyway, my point is, what we are doing is really helping marketers build finance-friendly marketing plans, proper marketing plans that have segmentation and positioning and creative and media and measurement strategies. It's planning grounded in the latest cutting-edge research from Binet & Field and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. So that is the what we are doing. Perhaps the more novel part, and what I think people have been paying more attention to, is how we actually do it,
Yes.
which is with this new technology called synthetic research. And how it works is, in a nutshell, is you take an audience, a hard-to-reach B2B audience, like let's say, chief investment officers or chief information security officers, and you actually create AI-generated copies of those customers. So you could create 1,000 different permutations of a CFO of a big company. And you would say that's a silicon sample or a synthetic sample. And you can then just do two very critical things with that synthetic sample. You can interview them, sort of like a focus group. So you can do qualitative research. And then you could do quantitative research. So you could say, okay, now I want 1,000 CFOs in 10 different markets to take a structured survey. Just like AI can take the LSAT or the GRE, it can take surveys. So we're really using this new technology, AI, to, I think, disrupt the space of market research, but in the interest of helping clients build finance-friendly marketing plans. Because if you ask the right questions, if you know what to ask the silicon sample, you can get the outputs you need to really put together a plan that quantifies the financial value of different marketing decisions in a way that you can bring to a CEO or a CFO.
There's a Picasso quotation that we really like, which is that the problem with computers is they only give you answers.
Yeah.
And answers are basically free now. They're abundant. I mean, you can get AI to give you any answer. The answer is really only as good as the question you ask of it.
Yeah.
And so, our whole thinking around this has been, okay, the questions are insanely more important now. And as Peter said, you have to ask the right questions. You need a way of thinking about marketing, a way of marketing. We have an advisor, Chris Burgrave, who was CMO at Budweiser for a long time, and he talks about a way of marketing. You can think of Ehrenberg Bass as a programmatic way of marketing, mental and physical availability, reach, messaging, and branding, and prominence, portfolio, and presence. And so people need a way of marketing. Ritson is also doing this, right? He's teaching people a way of marketing.
Yeah.
Most companies don't have a way of marketing. I mean, your way of marketing is different than my way of marketing, is different from his way of marketing, is different from her way of marketing, but we all work in the same team even, and so you need a way of asking specific programmatic questions that have specific programmatic outputs, and that will ultimately give you better process, which will give you better outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the core idea, is people focus too much on the outcomes in marketing, like the thing you did once that can never be repeated again. We're much more interested in the repeatable process you can run over and over and over, and then compound over time to build your brand and build your business.
And I think the key advantage here with synthetic research is just that historically, market research was, prohibitively expensive and extremely slow. And with these synthetic samples, you essentially have the customer on demand. Yeah. So you're able to get answers 1,000 times faster for a fraction of the cost. So we do see it as democratizing access to the customer, which then, again, can be used to build finance-friendly marketing.
So when I was looking into this and reading it, I was like, this is fascinating because, I've done this before where you're trying to get...
I told you it was interesting. See, he said it was fascinating. It's
yeah, even more than interesting. It's fascinating.
You're fascinating.
No, I'm not.
Very kind.
But,
very kind.
We would have been trying to, get... And I'm doing something at the moment, trying to get it in front of HR leaders and try to figure out, their kind of buying process and all that. And it's hard to do because, all the things you talked about, time poor, hard to find, you can't pay them even if you want to.
Right.
But how then do you create this synthetic sample? Where's the... without giving away secret sauce, where's all the data coming from?
Yeah, well, we're using a variety of different large language models. I always think, Brian, our engineer, can give you the technical answer.
Yeah, I wouldn't understand it. So
Layman.
Brian is our beloved co-founder and CTO.
Brilliant.
Hi,
And if you
Brian.
want the complicated answer, you can ask him. The simple answer is, okay, imagine you want to build a synthetic sample of CFOs. Now imagine you've got this genius robot, it's AI intelligence. Imagine reading everything every CEO has ever said in every newspaper article, every blog post, every earnings report, every thought leadership paper, every academic paper, an incomprehensible amount of data. So what would you have if you did that? You would basically have a very deep understanding of an audience and what an audience says about different topics or categories. And so when you have that intelligence, all of a sudden these synthetic samples are able to impersonate these audiences with just laser-like precision. And that is what ultimately led to us quitting, I mean, yes, it's a novel technology, but I would say John and I were actually kind of like technology skeptics in general.
Right.
We're always very skeptical of programmatic and big data, and in some cases even digital marketing. But with this technology, we just started to test it, and we started to compare side by side the traditional responses you would get from a real sample of CEOs to the synthetic one. And we were just completely blown away by the similarity. In some cases we saw 90%, 95% similarity. So you're talking about answers that are as good, maybe even better, because there's an interesting debate as to whether or not the difference is traditional research being wrong or a quote-unquote hallucination, and 1,000 times faster and more cost-effective.
Can I say one thing? So there's a core idea here, which is these are large language models. The first modality will be text, but soon we're going to get video data, which is actually much richer, and so I think these things are only become better and better and better, whereas traditional market research, I feel, is becoming worse and worse and worse. So our approach, I feel, gets better and better and better every time a new model comes out. The current approach, I don't think ever gets better and better and better, it just gets worse and worse and worse, as you described. So I think that's a very important shift. But large language models are actually much better at doing all of the things that are inputs to something like category entry point analysis or kind of market research, where you're trying to capture customer perception or verbatim, because they are trained on all of the corpus of text on the internet. I've actually seen a lot of the verbatims you get from people in market research, and honestly, it's not very compelling.
Yeah.
And I don't really even know how market researchers do the job that they do. I mean, they do a very good job of it, but to actually synthesize it into themes and core ideas that are needs-based is actually very difficult, whereas for a large language model, it's actually trivial. I mean, there was some study I saw that said, if you put the large language model kind of in the top 1% of like people, like in terms of like how articulate they are, how good they are at writing, they would be in like the top 1% of the top 1%. So LLMs are just uniquely equipped to do this thing with an extreme scale and understanding and speed.
Right.
And so it's just a place where it's a tool for marketers to use. They ought to not be scared of it. Like, it just makes you a better marketer. It gives you a deeper understanding of the customer, you know? It's not something to be scared of. I think it's better thought of as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. You know?
Yeah, that's actually a nice way of putting it. The accuracy, though, and I read that, you've testimonials on your website of people saying, like, it is really, really accurate. And, you know, you even were saying, like, you know, whether it's 80%, 90%, 95%, maybe that doesn't even matter either, because the decisions people are said they will make are the same based on what you've done versus the traditional research.
Yeah, that's a key insight, and something we learned, frankly, because when we were first comparing the results of synthetic and traditional, John and I were very focused on, like, are the actual numbers the same? And sometimes they are similar. But then we worked with one of our research partners, Professor Puntoni of Wharton, runs the AI Center at Wharton, and he impressed upon us like a much more important point, which is it doesn't even really matter if the numbers are exactly the same. The question is, what is the data telling you to do? And what decision are you going to make? And would you have made the same decision otherwise? So at first we were just straight looking at like mean difference of numbers. Then we started looking at correlations, which is also very high. But these days, I think really the core way we think about similarity is, did you reach the conclusions? And that's where we find synthetic research just absolutely crushes it. I mean, the test that was written about in our Adweek article on Marketing Week last week when we launched was with EY. So the CMO of EY, very talented CMO, Tony Clayton-Hine, she said, you know, if this is what you say it is, it would truly be revolutionary, you know, but like, you're going to need to prove it to me. So she gave us her survey. So this is a survey of CEOs of the biggest companies in the United States. And it was their attitude towards the category, their investment priorities, their perceptions of EY. She did not give us the answers. She only gave us the questions. And she said, okay, you come back to me with the synthetic answers, and I'll compare them. And we did that. So we mimicked the sample that had been in her survey, which, like all B2B surveys, had been running for, 8 weeks. I don't know exactly what it cost, but I'm sure
a lot of money.
A lot of money. And we gave her our answers, and we reached 95% of the same conclusions. So again, it comes back to, would you have made the same decision? And we just find time and time again, we've probably run 50 to 60 of those head-to-head tests. Almost every single time you would make the same conclusion.
I think to put a very specific point on it, it is decisions, not data. People are still focused on the data, and it's more about the decision than the data, which, to Professor Puntoni's credit, like, he helped us to really think about that. And I guess the other thing I would say about it is, whenever there's a new technology, people want to use the new technology to do the old thing. So, we're all figuring kind of out how it works and where it's strong and where it's weak, but people mostly want to ask questions about, like, here's the questions I'm asking today, now ask those same questions with AI. And I get that, right? You have to kind of understand, is it in any way, accurate? Is it kind of like trustworthy? But the real interesting thing I feel is, what are the questions you haven't been able to ask? What are the questions that didn't get into your survey? What questions from the survey did you get answers to that just left you more confused? Ask those questions. And so, again, coming back to the augmented intelligence idea, anybody who has a brand tracker or a brand survey that would like to know more about it or would like to bring the questions they didn't get to ask, I think that's an incredibly interesting, fertile place to go, because everybody is constrained by the amount of time people will spend with a survey, right?
But also the cost of units.
Right, exactly. It's very expensive, right? So there are these constraints that are no longer true. So we ought to be much more, I suppose, creative in how we think about the questions we ask, the surveys that we run. Like we've talked a lot about, I think there's fun ideas here around like, there's called survey fatigue, where at some point people get to question 30 and they just are like, get me out of here, C. But there's this other idea, so that's on like the respondent side. On the kind of client side, there's survey remorse, where you didn't quite ask the question the right way, and as a result you got data back and it doesn't really help you and kind of you wasted a question. And so I think this technology allows you to solve both of those problems around survey fatigue, because they're not real people, they're robots. They're infinitely patient, right? And then on the other side, we can kind of iterate a lot around the surveys in the course of a week, and that gives you kind of removes survey remorse. And so you're kind of solving for both sides of the equation, which is cool.
Yeah, I would just stress this flexibility point, because I think, again, when we started, we were like, oh, the value proposition for our synthetic research platform, it's going to be speed and cost. But I really think we found that as compelling, if not more compelling, is what John said about this ability to iterate. Like, we will do a kickoff call with a client, and they'll be expecting to discuss what's going to be in the survey, and we'll have already run the survey. We'll bring the entire research report to the kickoff call, and then say, okay, our next meetings are going to be iterating on this.
Wow.
Like, which other questions would you like to have asked? What would you like to go deeper on? How would you rerun this? Do you want the segmentation to be more firmographic or more psychographic? So the ability to actually have flexible market research as opposed to this very static format that frankly caused marketers a lot of anxiety, because as John said, if you didn't get it exactly right, you could have just spent $500,000 and waited 6 months for something that's not what you needed, and that doesn't put you in a great position.
Talk about like big decisions once a year.
Yeah, well, there's also when you think about the democratization of marketing strategy and market research, which I believe is our kind of vision, it kind of works in two ways. First, you've got these small or medium-sized businesses that frankly never bothered with market research because they couldn't afford it and they didn't have the time. They needed to make fast decisions. They'd rather spend the money marketing to their customers than running a big survey. So the obvious thing is it democratizes market research for those smaller companies. But actually most of our companies, most of our clients, we have about 25 clients, they're mostly very big enterprises. And for them, it's more that it's democratized the situations in which you would use market research. So you used to reserve it for only the biggest decision. You'd run one survey a year because it was so expensive, so complex, so time consuming. Now our clients are like, okay, if the customer is really on demand, it doesn't need to be a big decision. It could be a small decision. It could be which of these 3 taglines will be most memorable. It could be which of these 4 segments have the most commercial value. It could be what are the category entry points in Lithuania. It just, it expands the space that market research can play in. It can now be smaller decisions and faster decisions, whereas previously it could only be the biggest decisions that you could afford to wait 6 months for answers on.
I think there's a fun idea also, we were talking about it on the way over. So I would stress that we are talking a lot about market research now, but the research is only useful to make decisions. So the research is being used to make decisions around segmentation, targeting, positioning, core marketing strategy, STP. One of the things we've been looking at a lot is actually in our tool, we've built the ability to do segmentation where you can do as few as 2 segments, and you can do as many as 12 segments. But you can do 2, you can do 3, you can do 4, all the way down to 12. And one of the things we've noticed is once you get to 8 segments, they're not as good anymore. The 9th, the marginal benefit is obviously diminishing, right? So, and that's just an interesting thing you probably wouldn't have been able to do before AI, right? You wouldn't have been able to be like, I'll run it at 2, I'll now run it at 3, I'll now run it at 4, and compare all these things, because you were not going to run 12 different segmentation studies at different size segments. But you can do that now, and to me that is completely revolutionary, completely fascinating, because people will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. People that will listen to this have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get back a segmentation. And we can kind of tell them now from actually tinkering with the data that like you really don't want more than 8. You probably want 6. You probably want 4. But we could kind of like walk them through that whole experience, which to me is amazing because again, you just could not do that. And so that's kind of how I would think about all this stuff. Like you can do things around research you could never do before. You can do things around segmentation you could never. The stuff we do with category entry points and assigning a financial value to it and then modeling finance and marketing plans, that to me is just completely revolutionary and something that is deeply needed. Coming back to the point earlier around finance with finance, everyone needs a
I was
finance
going to ask you then
marketing
about the output being this kind of fully formed marketing plan. I was like, again, I wasn't expecting that because when I heard about this first, I was like, okay, it's the market research, so I get that, I'm going to get insights, but I didn't realize it's going to be like this fully formed marketing plan. Like, is it literally?
Yeah, that's
the
our
marketing
goal.
plan?
I mean, to us, it's the way we describe the company is it builds finance-friendly marketing plans. It just happens to be powered by this more efficient technology of AI.
Right.
I'm excited about what we're doing. I'm excited about how we're doing it, but I'm also very excited about who we're doing it with. Like, we have incredible advisors. We have Mark Ritson as an advisor. We have Chris Burgrave. We have Linda Boff, the former CMO of GE. We have Tomer Cohen, the chief product officer of LinkedIn. So, like, imagine Mark Ritson, and I don't need to imagine this is actually what we're doing. Imagine if Mark Ritson could build your marketing plan for you. Like, Ritson has given us the template of what a good financial marketing plan should look like, and we're just now able to deliver that programmatically to huge numbers of customers. So again, I think it all goes back to John's point of, do you know what questions to ask? If you're really familiar with the research on marketing effectiveness and you have true marketing expertise, you'll be able to use that to build a great marketing plan. If you just give any random marketer on the street access to a synthetic sample, and we have kind of tried this, they'll ask questions that, like, frankly, John and I don't think are particularly valuable, And we're happy that we can deliver it to them faster and cheaper than they could got before. It's an efficiency revolution either way, but for it to really create value, you've got to bring together the effectiveness with the efficiency.
Right.
You've got to be asking the right questions.
Because the inputs are so important, aren't they?
Exactly.
How much, I don't know, I didn't see it on the site. How much does it cost?
Well,
I mean, free for me, obviously.
I would say of course. For someone like you, it would be negative dollars. We would pay you. We would pay you to use it, Connor. We would pay you to use it. Yeah. Absolutely. I would say we are in the pricing has been something that has been. I think actually we are learning to be proper marketers. Like, in some sense, if I were to critique us, I would have said that we were theory people, and theory people just in one of the P's, which, as we know, is not the most important P whatsoever. And now we're becoming more full-fledged or full funnel or kind of 4P marketers. So, like, the product has been something we've been building with Brian, who has a great product mind. That's been fascinating. Obviously, we're thinking a lot about distribution. How do you do kind of the placement part of it? And I think we're very good at the advertising and branding part of it. But the part of it that has been the most challenging, but of course is the most important, is the pricing part of it. And people talk about it as price discovery. And a lot of what you are doing on these calls is you are trying to figure out kind of what the value to the marketer is. So our pricing is not a pricing that is on price, it is on value, right? It's not cost, it's value based. And honestly, the way that we think about it in some sense is people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for a segmentation. There's an argument to be made that we're going to give it to you, 10 times faster, 100 times faster. And even if it's just as good, you ought to pay us the same amount of money, right? Because you're getting an enormous speed advantage. I would say that we generally price like a little bit below what people would pay today. And we deliver it much, much faster with the ability to iterate and ask more questions. And so, like, the overall value proposition is much greater, but we try to do value-based pricing to the degree we can. But pricing is an art, not a science, although there is a science of it. And honestly, I feel that we are learning the pricing part of it every day.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're launching. It reminds me, just what you said there, reminds me a little bit about Tracksuit and what they've done on the brand tracking side of things. They've made it faster, easier, more cost efficient, but what was interesting, because one of the things I was thinking when I was, obviously looking into this as well, is like, my God, the competition must be just, quaking in their boots. But actually, when I spoke to the guys at Tracksuit, they were like, actually, there's still always space for those other guys. Like, we're not here to necessarily eat lunch. We're here to do a different thing in a different way. But I don't know if that's your strategy.
No, I completely agree with that. I'll also say, John and I are focused on, because people are like, oh, AI is good at this, it's bad at this. Like, John and I are doing the things we think it's good at. We think it's very good at segmentation. We think it's very good at category entry points. There are things that it's not yet good at, and we're not doing those things. And a great example of something synthetic research is not good at today is real-time analysis.
Okay.
Like, because of the lags in a lot of the data models, something that happened yesterday is not going to show up in the data today. So if you want real-time brand tracking, that is not something synthetic data is able to do today, and that's where you would potentially need to continue working with a brand tracking company. That said, it's a rapidly advancing technology. I always tell clients, everything I just showed you is the worst it will ever be. It's getting better and better and better. So if we have this conversation next year at Cannes, for all I know, it will be real time. You will be able to do longitudinal data. Like, that is, I think, a reasonable level of confidence in the technology. But all of that is to say there are things it's going to be good at and things it's not going to be good at. And there's always going to be room for multiple types of research approaches to address different use cases.
I would also say we are generally always counter-positioning against the things that we don't think make sense, or things that are very crowded and competitive, to be frank. And my experience, we've talked a lot about this, is that people are using AI to do things that are towards the end of the process, which is measurement, and towards the tactical process, like which tagline is going to perform better.
Or creative generation.
Or generating creative, right? We're not doing those things. Like, we're not in the tactical, we're not in the creative, we're not in the real-time measurement part of the business. We're in the opposite part of the business. We are doing the highest upstream planning, financial planning, that should inform all of the decisions you make around which category entry points to talk about, which creative to develop, which media channels to run. Like, all that stuff really matters, but our belief is you have to get the upstream financial decisions right, because only then do you even get the budget and the support from finance and sales to be able to do those things. And also I would say we're more in the B2B space than in the B2C space, though we have 3 very big B2C customers, and they seem to be very happy, and they are especially interested in doing more occasion-based marketing. So that's just been an interesting observation from the B2B versus B2C side. Like, the B2B marketers need everything, whereas the B2C marketers really want like the financial assessment of category entry points or occasions or whatever they call it. So I have learned just something about, I didn't think we would be doing what we do in B2C, frankly, but I
didn't know you were, actually. So that's interesting. And markets-wise, where are you? I mean, obviously, US, are you in, like, if anyone listening in France or Australia, like,
global.
It's global,
we
available
have clients
everywhere.
all over the world, and we have national clients that work with us on different regional cuts, which again is just like, it's expanded the use case for that. You always had this big problem. Many of our clients, many of the CMOs we work with have said, hey, I do a brand health study, I do a brand positioning analysis in my one biggest market, and then I try to take it to a smaller market like Estonia, and they're like, well, this isn't relevant because it was conducted in this other country. Now, with synthetic research, you can run an analysis just of Estonia, and it's not going to be as time and cost prohibitive as it would have been before. So it is, it's an international opportunity, and we work with clients at this point, I would say, in every market of the world.
So there's an idea I read somewhere, it's well covered, it's not my idea by any means, but the core idea is that when technologies go from being traditional to digital, the market size expands, often by 10, 20, 100x. And I think you see that in advertising. I mean, every retail company, every grocery company also now has an enormous ad business. Uber has an enormous ad business. Amazon has an enormous ad business. That would not have been the case in an offline traditional world. So this kind of technology, the core point I guess I'm making is that research used to be maybe just market research. Now there's all sorts of research, totally different research. So this is going to expand research, and every research company, every market researcher, every frankly marketer, brand marketer, performance marketer, whatever marketer, will benefit from this expanding opportunity around asking more questions, doing more research to make more Evidenza.
Do you know what? I was only thinking we didn't have enough Evidenza puns. But
we got to get some Evidenza.
We got, I mean, some marketers need to go on the defensa with Evidenza and kind of prove that their plan's the right plan. Some people got to go on the offensa with Evidenza. And
you're not giving any sort of panache.
Well, I'm not truly
go
Italian.
Go on the offensa with Evidenza. Go on the defensa with Evidenza.
John Zach, he's Italian American, but you're definitely more Italian than I am. I will admit it. Yeah.
Last question for you. What's it like, obviously, LinkedIn, big, huge organization, complexity probably, but lots of other things that come with that. Now in kind of, I guess, startup mode, how does that feel? Like, how are you managing that? How are you managing yourselves?
It's been an incredible experience. I would...
Poorly.
I would go back to our core belief. If there's one thing John and I learned at the B2B Institute working with all these experts, it is the value of brand. And we were so fortunate to work at LinkedIn. And through our 10 years there, I like to think John and I built like a bit of a brand. Like we have a following on LinkedIn. We have people who know our work. And so when we started a business, we did not have a cold start, We scaled to $1 million in revenue in 5 months. And it was because people were already familiar with us, and we had been investing in the brand for 10 years, right? And another thing about brand is it's very extensible. It allows you to move into new spaces. So in our case, we took the brand we'd been building and we moved it into this new space of synthetic strategy or synthetic research, and it allowed us to kind of ramp up quickly. So we loved LinkedIn. We had an incredible time there, but we've loved building our own thing. We've loved being in control of all the branding, which has been fun for us. Obviously at LinkedIn, LinkedIn is a brand. It has its own brand.
And you went not blue.
Yes,
as well.
we went not blue. Let's just say go on the offensive with Evidenza would not have been a tagline approved by the LinkedIn Corporation. So now John and I we're free to be as weird as we want to be with our creative and with our product. And for us, that's very liberating.
And I would say what I really have enjoyed about it, working with Peter, working with Brian, is, again, we are learning all 4 Ps of the marketing process. And I feel for the first time we really get to, a frustration we had is that you often make these recommendations to big B2B brands, but as you said, they are complex political organizations, and they can't necessarily do the things they need to do. We can do whatever we want to do. So the things that we believe, we don't believe most advertising has to make sense. It just needs to be memorable. So when we say go on the offenza with Evidenza, go on the defensa with Evidenza, my core insight there is it rhymes, and people remember things that rhyme. And therefore, ergo, it's a good idea. Does it have to make sense? No, we just have to be remembered for it. We have to remember that if you need to go on the offensa, you come to us. If you're on the defensa, you come to us. And that works. We've had customers who are like, I need something to show my CEO, and it's got to be financial in 5 days. There's no other way I can get that. I'm on the defensa. And we help the customer like that. Others have a lot more planning and time, and so they're like, we want to go on the offense, and we want to come to you to help with that. But I feel like in some ways, this is even a meta point that we've taken the core idea of category entry points and even applied it to our own business. We help on the offensa. We help on the defensa. We have advisors that cover B2B, cover B2C. We have some in AI, some in academics. Some are more entertainers in the academic side. Some are more practitioners in the academic side. We do segmentation, targeting, positioning. And so you can take these ideas and actually put them to use in your business. And we are not a big business. And so to me, that's also proof that these ideas are not just ideas for big businesses. Yeah. They're ideas for small businesses. Anybody can go out and do it.
Not a big business yet. I think next year we're going to be on one of those yachts back there with a big
but these ones are so small. Surely we can find a bigger yacht than that. Also, obviously we're partial to Italy, so I think our yacht will probably be maybe in Capri, or I'm sorry, John. I'm sorry. John gets very
They've just, it's over. John's walking.
I'm sorry. When you mispronounce Capri, it's embarrassing. But yeah, so, I think somewhere in the Italian Riviera on a yacht sounds great. Hopefully,
I'm on for that.
Yeah.
I'm on for that.
You're welcome to join us.
Thanks a million. Well, thanks so much
for having us,
coming by. And I use the word sound. I don't know if you've worked with a lot of Irish people, but sound people are just people who are good to work with, are nice people you want to spend time with. You two are dead sound, and I think that is why this is going to be a huge success for you. Apart from all the great, the product, everything else, but I think the soundness of you two really helps. And I honestly wish you the best success.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a million.
Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks a million, guys. Good to see you.
Well, as I finished in this episode, John and Pete are two of the soundest people I have met. They're a great company and draw an incredible number of very high-profile marketers to their orbit. It says something about them. Leaving LinkedIn was definitely a big bet to take. They were the faces of the B2B Institute, and I've no doubt were highly regarded, especially as LinkedIn has now more purposefully positioned itself as the B2B platform. Now, look, every company survives departures. It's often kind of a sobering realization that hits us at some stage of our career. Thankfully, I realized this before I was made redundant at Indeed. But John and Pete have definitely left to build and create something that is disrupting and first to market. And you can hear how they're going to make it easier, faster to get research about hard to reach audiences. And it's already proving to be highly accurate and informative. And good luck to these guys. I hope they don't forget to invite me to their yacht next year. Next week is going to be the last of the Cannes session episodes, and it's another bumper edition with Jimmy Knowles of Canva and James Herman, who's a returning guest. James, obviously very well known for his work at Previously Unavailable, co-founder of Tracksuit, author, and obviously he has his creativity course on work. So stay tuned for another bumper episode next week.